Rhodesia and Zimbabwe. Two names for a piece of land along the Zambezi River in southern Africa, deep inside the continent. Despite the age of colonialism, the territory has remained largely unclaimed for a long time by European powers. This would change, however, in 1880 when the mining magnate Cecil Rhodes obtained exclusive mineral rights from the king of Matabele land. The so-called Rudd concession served as the foundation for the armed endeavors of his British South Africa Company into foreign territory. But Rhodes never actually confined himself only to mining. His real intention was to annex the land for the British Empire and to make a name for himself by building the Cape to Cairo railway that would connect all British African colonies by train. While the railway he envisioned never completely materialized, his actions would definitely carry another big consequence for the whole world to see. Armed with a royal charter, Rhodes' British South Africa Company had the power to administer a territory stretching from the Limpopo to the Zambezi River under the British flag. This charter gave Rhodes also the power to raise the British South Africa Police and the Pioneer Column. These organizations served as an expedition corps that would encourage and protect the new white settlers in what would later become southern Rhodesia. But Rhodes wasn't stopping there. He planned to encroach further up north and slowly established a serious power inside foreign realms that wouldn't go uncontested. Now, after all, this was still Matabele land, so Rhodes was well within his terms of a Rudd concession, or wasn't he? Because King Lobengula, the leader of the Matabele, later claimed that he was misled about the terms of the agreement and did not fully understand its implications. Since neither side wanted to back down, time for talking was over, and so they settled their differences with violence in the First Matabele War. While the whites were busy with farming and extracting minerals, the Matabele were raiding and subjugating the Shona tribes in Mashona land throughout 1891 and 1902. King Lobengula ensured that his raiding parties were directed away from the main target areas of Mashona land. This way he avoided possible clashes between his zealous young commanders and the white settlers, until a Shona vessel decided to stop tribute payments, because he was under the impression that he was now under the protection of the whites. In order to save face, Lobengula was impelled to send a raiding party to bring his vessel to heel. Complaints about the raids were made to the administration of the British South Africa Company, who felt that they had to intervene to avoid losing the confidence of the Shona people, who they worked with as well. As a result, the company officials demanded from the raiders that they leave immediately. The Matabele refused and the clashes left them with 40 casualties. Since the course of the conflict was clear, the British South Africa Company gathered the forces of about 700 men that moved towards the Matabele's capital at Bulawayo, together with another 700 men from the Bachuana tribe. But the real most valuable assets were the 5 newly developed Maxim machine guns that would almost single-handedly decide the course of the war. Despite a fraction of the Matabele being armed with modern Martini Henry rifles that they received as a part of a Rudd concession, they performed badly due to a lack of training. During their baptism of fire at the Shangani River, they were mowing them down literally like grass. Out of 3,500 enemy combatants, 1,500 died in the battle. The British South Africa Company, on the other hand, only lost 4 men. A week later, the opposing sides would meet again at 50 kilometers away from the Matabele capital Bulawayo. 2,000 Matabele riflemen and 4,000 warriors attacked with the same result. At least 2,500 were killed. As soon as King Lobengula heard the devastating news, he and his entourage torched the city before they left. As the flames burned their homes, the ammunition magazine exploded and destroyed what was left of the ancient city. Even when the British arrived the next day, the flames were still consuming the settlement. BSEC troops and white settlers nailed the company flag as well as the Union Jack to a tree. When Rhodes heard the news, he ordered the new settlement to be found on the ruins of Lobengula's royal kraal, a typical action by a conquering power. This is where the State House stands today. Within 9 months, Bulawayo had been partially rebuilt with a population of about 1,900 colonists and 2,000 more aspirants incoming. Bulawayo was also connected to the Cape to Cairo railway in 1897. But it wasn't a walk in the park for the BSEC troops neither. A column of 290 men chased the king along the Shangani River. Since his wagon tracks were easily traceable, 37 of them crossed the river separately, but were ambushed and died in the last stand, while only 3 made it back. The reinforcements were unable to do anything, since the Shangani rose and was therefore impossible to cross. Unable to neither help nor pursue the king, the column returned but was ambushed during the 2-week trek back to Bulawayo. Only thanks to an experienced commander who served in the Anglo-Zulu War, his men survived. In one instance they even set up a decoy camp but was ambushed by the Matabele for half a day. While the column returned defeated and humiliated to Bulawayo, King Lobengula fell ill and eventually died of smallpox in January 1894. With the king dead, a man called Mejan, the most senior among the eldest, took command of the Matabele. Mejan was an old man and his only son had been killed in the war. He wished nothing more than to make peace, and his wish shall be granted. Matabele land was brought under company control, the Matabele kingdom was dissolved and the region gradually turned into Rhodesia. While the whites were successful in their colonization attempts, not everything was love and sunshine among them as well. Internal divisions in the South African colonies drove the Dutch settlers away from the British, who went on to found the Transvaal Republic. In October 1895, discrimination of British settlers and disputes over railway fees angered the British so much that the Rhodesians raided the Republic with a party of 500 men from the north. The so-called Jamesons Raid had the aim to start an uprising among the British workers and ultimately incorporate the Free States into the British Empire. The armed raiding party was quickly spotted by a Boer outpost the moment they crossed the border and confronted after just 20 kilometers. In the ensuing shootout, the raiders lost 40 men, before Jameson decided that it was hopeless and surrendered. They were incarcerated and shipped to the UK for trial. The sheer embarrassment that Rhodes had to face made him resign as the Prime Minister of the Cape Colony, as he and his company was torn apart in the British press. Meanwhile, the Transvaal government was paid almost £1 million in reparation by the British South Africa Company. The incursion was also one of the triggers for the Second Anglo-Boer War in 1899. Jamesons Raid had also depleted Rhodesia of many of its troops and left the country virtually undefended. Seizing on this weakness, the Matabele and the Shona rose up in 1896. It would later be known as the Second Matabele War. Not even 3 months after the ill-fated raid, the Matabele and Shona rose up against the white authority. The Matabele spiritual leader, the so-called Mnimo, was credited with fomenting much of the anger that led to this confrontation. The Mnimo convinced his fellow tribe, as well as the Shona, that the white settlers, who were almost 4,000 strong by then, were responsible for the drought, locust plagues, and the cattle disease ravaging the country at the time. The first full moon of the 29th of March would be the sign to take Bulawayo by surprise, immediately after a ceremony called the Big Dance. The Mimlo promised through his priests that if the Matabele went to war, then the bullets of the colonizers would change to water and the cannon shells would become eggs. His plan was to kill all of the settlers in Bulawayo, as it would serve again as a royal kraal for the newly reincarnated King Lobengula. After that, the whites should be driven from the country through the Mangwe Pass on the western edge of the Matobo Hills, which was to be left open and unguarded for this reason. Once the settlers were purged from Bulawayo, the Matabele and Shona warriors would head out into the countryside and continue the slaughter until all the settlers were either killed or had fled. But the rebellion started 10 days prematurely, since several young Matabele were overly anxious to go to war and lacked discipline. Over the next few days, so many violent incidents occurred that the settlers became suspicious. On the 24th of March, more than 2,000 Matabele warriors began to march in Bulawayo, supported by deserted native policemen and armed to the teeth with the newest European repeating and bolt-action rifles, but also native armament such as spears and shields. On their way to the capital city, they slaughtered uninformed settlers left and right and burned homes, ranches and mines. The whites who got word of it quickly built defenses around Bulawayo. Patrols collected all the settlers living south of the Matobo Hill and fought off scouts and other raiding parties. By the time the Matabele forces completely arrived, over 50,000 men besieged the city against 2,000 colonists. But they once again faced the same issues. They never mounted a real assault against the settlers, since the Maxim guns mowed them down. So the only option was to starve them out and ambush the escapees. Conditions inside Bulawayo quickly became unbearable. False alarms were common and an overcrowded village with 1,000 women and children added onto the stress. Although they kept up their siege, the Matabele made one critical error. They neglected to cut the telegraph lines connecting Bulawayo to Mafeking. This gave both the relief forces and the besieged Bulawayo field force far more information than they would otherwise never had. Several relief columns were organized to break the siege, but the long trek through hostile countryside took several months. In total, about 6 relief columns were organized, and one of them was led by Cecil Rhodes himself. The southern relief forces were nearly ambushed on their approach, but a scout discovered the whereabouts of the Matabele, and the Maxim guns forced the attackers into hiding. Despite the long treks, the columns almost arrived simultaneously and immediately broke the siege, and an estimated 50,000 Matabele retreated into the Matabele Hills, an area of about 400 square kilometers, which would become the scene of the fiercest battles in the whole war. The Rhodesians got lucky when their intelligence could localize the Mlimo in a cave mostly by himself. Two experienced scouts managed to sneak past hundreds of warriors into his personal cave, where they waited. Once the Mlimo started his dance of immunity, a scout shot him just below the heart, killing him in the process. Surprisingly, they made it back in one piece to Bulawayo, with hundreds of warriors in pursuit. Upon learning of the death of the Mlimo, Cecil Rhodes walked unarmed into the Matabele stronghold and persuaded the Matabele to lay down their arms. As the war in Matabele land ended, Mashona land tried its luck as well, but needless to say that they were no match for the Rhodesians. On a quick side note, one of the scouts that had a significant impact in exploring Rhodesia, the Cape to Cairo Railway, fought and survived the Shangani patrol and killed the Mlimo was no other than Frederick Russell Burnham, one of the best scouts in the world. The other one was Robert Baden-Powell, who provided with his book Scouting for Boys the foundation for the UK Scouts and the American Boy Scouts movement. Both are still remembered and celebrated as pioneers in their field of scouting, education and character development. I'm not gonna lie, but this war brought out many interesting personalities. While the Rhodesians remained undefeated, Cecil Rhodes unfortunately passed away due to a weak heart at the age of 48. In his will, Rhodes directed that he should be buried in the Matopos Hills. His burial was attended by Matabele chiefs, who asked the firing party not to discharge their rifles, as this would disturb the spirits. Then for the first and probably the only time, they gave the European the Royal Matabele salute. Though it should be considered that from 1898 onwards, Ndebele chiefs were usually paid agents of the company administration. Rhodes is buried alongside the 34 company soldiers that were killed in the Shangani patrol, just like Jameson, who was buried there as well after his death in 1917. Even though Mr. Rhodes is still a controversial figure in African history, it can't be denied that his actions and his vision left a legacy that is still remembered to this day.